The dust in the Imperial Palace did not settle. It moved. It swam in the thin, recycled air, a perpetual golden haze caught in the lance strips of light that fell from vaulted ceilings miles high. For Sister Evangeline of the Order's Famulus, the dust was a chronicle. Each mote carried a story, a fragment of parchment from the Unification Wars, a sliver of ceramite from a forgotten hero's armor, the atomic decay of glory. Her footsteps, silent on the marble-tiled floor, sent tiny eddies through history. Her assignment was a blessing and a curse. To oversee the recataloguing of a minor archival annex in the Palatine Hive's lower reaches, a place untouched for standard centuries. It was considered dull, dutiful work, far from the intrigue of the Senatorum Imperialis. It was also the only place, she had come to believe, where one could hear the palace whisper. The annex was a maw of darkness until she triggered the lumens. They flickered to life with a tired hum, revealing a cavernous hall swallowed by data stacks, stone tablets, and crystalline memory foils piled in seemingly chaotic heaps. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and slow stone decay. Her adept, a gaunt man named Kalen, whose eyes were magnified by thick lenses, shivered beside her. "A tomb of words, my lady. I have the manifest. Section Gamma, 7. Personal effects and architectural logs from the early reconsecration of the Inner Throne Wing, M31, deemed non-essential, held for potential aesthetic review." "Begin," Evangeline said, her voice soft yet absolute. Her fingers, gloved in simple gray cloth, brushed against the first stack. It was not parchment or plasteel that met her touch, but rock, rough-hewn dark basalt, utterly alien amidst the palace's polished grandeur. She pulled a slab free. It was a fragment of a larger structure, its surface etched not with high Gothic, but with a spiraling, fluid script that made her eyes water and her soul flinch. It was not of human origin, yet here it was, sealed in the heart of humanity's greatest fortress. Kalen peered over. "Xenos litho carvings, probably brought as a trophy. Shall I log it as a decorative spoil of the Great Crusade?" Evangeline did not answer. She traced the script, and a shiver traveled up her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The symbols seemed to shift, to coil like serpents in the corner of her vision. She had studied forgotten tongues in the Scholastica Psychana's restricted stacks. This was not Eldari, nor was it the brutal chop logic of the orcs. It was older, deeper, a script designed not just to be read, but to be felt. And what it conveyed was a profound, crushing silence. Not an absence of sound, but an absence of everything. A void before stars. Hours bled away as they worked. The mundane logs of stonemasons and supply clerks were interred with increasingly bizarre fragments. More basalt, pieces of a strange, non-reflective alloy that drank the light. And finally, a sealed stasis casket no larger than a human skull. The manifest simply read, "Origin point, inner foundation, subject, structural anomaly, do not breach." Kalen looked nervous. "The seal is of the Magos Explorator. The stasis field is still active, but fading. Its power source has been leaching for millennia." Evangeline held the casket. It was cold enough to burn. Through the faint blue haze of the stasis field, she saw not an artifact, but a cavity. A perfect, smooth hole in a piece of the same dark basalt. It was not a carving or a damage. It was as if a sphere of something had been removed from reality, leaving only its negative impression in the stone. As she watched, the stasis field flickered. Once, twice, and died. The air around the casket seemed to thicken. The ever-present dust stopped its dance and hung suspended. A pressure built in Evangeline's ears, a profound and deafening silence that pushed out all sound. In that silence, a single clear thought that was not her own echoed in her mind. A thought etched with the same despair as the alien script. "We built our tomb around it. Why did you wake us?" The lumens overhead blew out in a cascade of sparks, plunging them into a darkness that felt absolute, ancient, and hungry. Darkness was not merely an absence of light in the depths of the palace. It was a presence. It had weight and texture. The cold, gritty feel of undisturbed centuries pressing against the skin. Evangeline's training overrode the primal surge of panic. She did not gasp, she did not cry out, she became still, one hand on the cold basalt slab, the other instinctively reaching for the compact las pistol at her hip, a tool she had never expected to need here. Across from her, she heard Kalen's sharp, ragged intake of breath, the scuff of his boots on the floor as he stumbled back. "Do not move," she commanded, her voice a low, steady force in the consuming quiet. "Your data slate. The low light function. Now." The fumbling clicks were agonizingly loud. A moment later, a sickly green glow erupted from the adept's hands, illuminating his terrified, magnified eyes and throwing long, distorted shadows up the walls of data stacks. The world had shrunk to this small island of eerie light. The basalt fragment in her hand felt unnaturally warm now, as if it were bleeding stored heat from an ancient Sunday. The strange, spiraling script seemed to pulse faintly in the gloom. "The casket," Kalen whispered, the light trembling in his grip. He pointed a shaking finger. The stasis casket lay open on the floor. The piece of basalt, with its impossible spherical cavity, was gone, not shattered, not moved, simply absent, as if it had never been there. In its place was a faint, shimmering distortion in the air, a lens of wrongness that made Evangeline's stomach twist. Looking at it was like trying to focus on a memory just out of reach. "We built our tomb around it." The words resonated in her skull again, not as a voice, but as a cold, hard fact implanted directly into her consciousness. This was no psychic echo. It was a message in a bottle, thrown across time, and she had broken the seal. "We must report this," Kalen hissed, his professionalism crumbling under the visceral fear. "A Xenos contagion. A psychic residue. The Inquisition must be summoned." "And tell them what?" Evangeline interrupted, her mind racing through the labyrinthine protocols of the Imperium. A famulous sister and a lowly adept, claiming to have triggered an alien intelligence sealed within the palace's very bones? They would be mind-scrubbed as a precaution, their bodies turned into servitors for disturbing the sacred silence of the archives. Their discovery would be buried deeper than the secret itself. "We report nothing." "Not yet." She knelt, ignoring Kalen's strangled protest, and shone the data slate's light over the open casket. Inside, etched on the plasteel lining where the rocket rested, was a diagram. It was a schematic, stunningly precise, rendered in a style that was neither Imperial nor Mechanicus. It depicted concentric rings of structure, and at the very center, a void marked with those same spiraling symbols. The labels were in a script that made her head ache, but the architecture was unmistakable. It was a cross-section of the Imperial Palace itself. The void was not in some distant wing. According to the scale, it was here, deep beneath the throne room, beneath the foundations, beneath even the ancient bedrock of the Himalayas. This was not a trophy. It was a warning label, a marker for something entombed. "The architectural logs from this sector," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Find them. The original Foundation surveys, M30 or earlier, before the Emperor's final enshrinement." Terrified but obedient, Kalen began to search, his fingers fluttering over data slates and crystal rolls. The oppressive silence began to recede, replaced by a low, almost sub-audible hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Evangeline rose, the basalt slab still in her hand. She approached the wall of the archive annex, a massive, seamless expanse of adamantium-reinforced rockcrete. She placed her palm flat against it. The vibration was faint, a constant, deep-throated pulse, like the heartbeat of a slumbering god. Every citizen of Terra knew that feeling, the endless background tremor of the palace's mighty engines, the footsteps of titans on parade, the distant prayers from the temple of the Emperor. But this was different. It was slower, older, out of sync with the rhythm of the Imperium. As her palm pressed against the cold surface, another image flashed behind her eyes, sharp and painful, a vast, starless darkness. And within it, not one, but many silences, layered atop one another, a choir of absences singing a dirge of endings. The message clarified, the despair now tinged with a desperate urgency. You stand upon the seal. The wardens are gone. The sleeper must not stir. Found it! Kalen's voice was a strained crack in the heavy air. He held up a thick, mold-spotted folio of actual vellum, its edges crumbling. The master survey for this sublevel, conducted by the Order of the Sigillite in the early years of the palace's expansion, before the internment. He spread the brittle pages on a nearby lectern, the green light of the data slate washing over intricate, hand-drawn schematics. Evangeline joined him, the cool weight of the basalt fragment, a constant, ominous presence in her hand. The diagrams were breathtaking in their complexity. A web of tunnels, conduits, energy sinks, and foundational pylons that stretched down into the planetary crust. But her eyes were drawn to a series of notations written in the crisp, uncompromising hand of a Malcador-era archivist. They marked certain chambers and conduits, not with High Gothic names, but with a string of numerals and a single repeating glyph, a circle bisected by a vertical line contained within a triangle. The glyph of solitude, Evangeline breathed, the words tasting of ash. She had seen it only once before, in a black-bound tome chained to a desk in the deepest Famulus repository. It was a mark of ultimate quarantine, not for disease or daemons, but for concepts. For truths so dangerous their mere knowledge could unmake reality. Kalen traced a trembling finger along a central shaft that dove deep beneath the annotated chambers. This conduit, it doesn't appear on any modern schemata. It's listed here as the umbilicus imperative. Primary function, dispersal. He looked up, his lenses gleaming. Dispersal of what? The subaudible hum in the walls deepened momentarily, vibrating up through the floor and into their bones. A fine shower of dust sifted from the ceiling high above. Evangeline's mind, trained in the connecting of disparate threads of information bloodlines, treaties, hidden alliances, began to weave a terrible tapestry. The alien script of despair, the negative space artifact, the schematic of the palace as a containment structure, the glyph of solitude, the umbilicus imperative. Not dispersal, she said, the realization cold and absolute. Diffusion, like bleeding pressure from a reactor, containing something by spreading it thin. She looked from the ancient schematic to the modern solid wall. They didn't build the palace on a mountain. They built a mountain, a fortress, an empire over a prison. A new sound began then. Not a hum, but a scrape. A slow, grating drag of stone on stone, coming from the far end of the archive hall, deep in the stacks where the light did not reach. Kalen froze, the data slate's light jerking towards the sound. Nothing moved in the pool of green illumination. The custodians? He whispered, hope brittle in his voice. Custodians do not scrape, Evangeline replied, drawing her pistol. The whine of its capacitor charging was the most comforting sound she had heard in hours. The scraping came again, closer. It was followed by a wet, rhythmic sound. A drip, splat, silence, splat. The smell reached them a moment later, not the ozone and dust, but the coppery tang of fresh blood and the stale, dry scent of old bones. From between two towering stacks of crystal foils, a figure shambled into the edge of the light. It wore the ragged, dusty robes of a minor scribe, its head bowed. Its feet, bare and bloody, scraped across the floor. In one hand, it dragged a heavy, blunt tool, a servo skull repurposed as a crude hammer. Splat! A drop of dark blood fell from its obscured face onto the stone. "Halt in the name of the Emperor," Evangeline commanded, aiming the pistol center mass, her voice ringing with an authority she did not feel. The figure stopped. Its head lifted with a sickening, crackling sound. Kalen gagged. The scribe's face was a ruin of self-inflicted trauma. The eyes gouged out, the lips chewed away to expose teeth locked in a perpetual scream. But it was the forehead that held their gaze. There, crudely carved into the living bone with frantic, jagged strokes, was the same spiraling script from the basalt slab. The thing's mouth, a ragged hole, worked soundlessly. Then, a torrent of voices spilled forth, a chorus of whispers in 100 tongues. High Gothic, Low Gothic, Technolingua, languages dead for millennia, all speaking in terrifying unison. "The wardens are gone. The seals fail. The silence is hungry. It hears your thinking. It hates your noise. It took a lurching step forward, the skullhammer rising. It wants to be whole. We must be quiet. We must make it quiet. The last shot was a searing line of crimson in the gloom, striking the thing in the center of its chest. It staggered, the impact vaporizing cloth and flesh, but it did not fall. A dry, rattling sound issued from its ruined mouth, something horribly like laughter. The chorus of voices gurgled, then reformed. Flesh, noise, spark noise, more threads for the silence. It surged forward with a speed that belied its broken state. Evangeline fired again, twice, punching neat, smoking holes through its torso. It flinched, but came on, the skullhammer swinging in a wide, brutal arc. She threw herself back, the crude weapon whistling past her face, close enough to stir her hair. Kalen screamed, not in terror, but in a sudden, shocking rage. He lunged forward, not away, swinging the heavy data slate like a club. It connected with the thing's temple with a wet crunch. The scribe thing reeled, its head snapping to the side. For a second, the whispered chorus fragmented into a cacophony of distinct, terrified screams, the original owners of the voices, perhaps, trapped within the horror. In that moment of fractured control, Evangeline took careful aim and fired a fourth shot.
This one took it in the carved forehead, directly in the center of the spiraling script. The skull did not explode. It unfolded. The bone petals peeled back like a grotesque flower, revealing not brain matter, but a swirling, pitch-black vortex that sucked the green light from the data slate into its depths. A final, unified whisper sighed out, full of a profound, eternal relief. Quiet, at last. Then the body collapsed, crumpling into a heap of rags and dissipating flesh, as if the energy binding it had been abruptly severed. The ensuing silence was deafening. The hum in the walls had ceased. The only sound was Kalan's ragged panting and the faint sizzle from the last pistol's barrel. Evangeline stared at the remains. The script on the bone was gone, faded away like ink and fire. It wasn't possessing him, she said. Her own voice sounded strange to her ears. It was erasing him, using his body as a puppet of absence. That symbol was a focal point. Kalan leaned against a stack, wiping his face with a trembling hand. A focal point for what? What is this? The opposite of the warp, Evangeline said softly, the final piece clicking into place with dreadful certainty. She thought of the pure, negative space in the artifact, the sinning silences in her vision, the desperate message of the long-dead Xenos, that Imperium is a realm of chaotic thought and emotion given form. This is an anti-realm, a manifestation of absolute nullity, not death, but UN being. The Xenos, whoever they were, discovered it, or it discovered them. They realized they couldn't destroy it, so they tried to contain it, to bury it in the most solid, real matter they could find, a tomb of rock at the heart of their greatest world. She looked around the vast, dark archive, seeing it now not as a repository, but as a mausoleum built upon a deeper, darker grave. And when the Emperor built his palace here, unearthing the old foundations, he didn't find an empty tomb, he found a leaking one. So he did what he does, he built a better prison. The palace itself, faith, the war, the endless, roaring noise of the Imperium isn't just a symbol of power, it's a psychic dam, the umbilicus imperative. It must channel the null energy, diffuse it, lead it off through the trillion lives and endless rituals, using the sheer volume of existence to dilute the nothingness. Kalan's eyes were wide with a horror that now held a sliver of understanding. And the wardens? The message said the wardens are gone. The Sigilites' order, Evangeline nodded. The ones who understood, perhaps the Emperor himself, they are gone, are preoccupied. Her thoughts went to the golden throne, to the endless, silent struggle at the heart of all this roaring humanity. Was that the final seal, the ultimate distraction? A new vibration began, different from the hum. It was a deep, rhythmic thud, like a colossal heartbeat, coming up through the floor. With each beat, the lumens that had blown out flickered erratically, and for a microsecond, the darkness was not merely an absence of light. It was a solid, tingled, dense, and hungry. In those fleeting moments of absolute black, Evangeline felt a pull, not on her body, but on herself, a promise of an end to all fear, all pain, all struggle, a sweet, silent oblivion. "The seal is failing," she said, forcing the words through a sun-crushing lethargy. The promise of quiet was so seductive. That entity, or whatever it is responding. It's trying to coalesce. We removed a piece of its prison. We gave it a focal point in our reality. She looked at the basalt slab she still clutched. It was no longer warm. It was cold, colder than space. It's using the silence we created to reach out. The thudding grew stronger. From the darkened aisles of the archive, they heard more scraping feet, more wet, dragging sounds. They were not alone. The thudding was a drumbeat for the end of thought. With each concussive wave, Evangeline felt her mind grow thinner, her memories becoming faded portraits behind glass. She fought it, clutching the basalt slab until its fierce cold bit through her glove, using the pain as an anchor. Kalan was worse off. He stood swaying, his eyes glazed, a thin line of drool tracing from his slack mouth. The promise of the silence was a siren song, and he was drifting towards it. We must make noise. The realization was a spark in the encroaching void. The entity fed on, or perhaps was, the absence. The Imperium's constant, roaring existence was its cage. They had to re-energize that cage, here and now. "Kalan," she slapped him, the crack of her palm against his cheek shockingly loud in the chamber. He jerked, blinking, the archival manifest one with the restricted liturgical codes, the hymns of binding. "Find them, now." The command, sharp and rooted in Imperial discipline, pierced his stupor.
He stumbled back to the lectern, his fingers fumbling over the data slates. The scraping from the darkness was closer now. Figures emerged at the edges of their failing light, more scribes. A servitor with its tools now turned to self-mutilation. Even the desiccated corpse of a long-dead archivist, pulled from its niche and animated by the carving of that spiraling script upon its brow. A chorus of ruined mouths opened. Join the quiet. End the pain. Become nothing. Evangeline raised her last pistol, but did not fire. Ammunition was finite, and destroying the host bodies did not stop the signal. It merely freed the energy to find another. They needed a different kind of weapon. "Here!" Kalen cried, his voice cracking as he pulled a slender crystal rod from a case. "The Canticle of Solid Worlds, an isolation ward hymn used in the founding of fortress monasteries. It's a tonal key meant to resonate with rock and steel. Play it," she ordered, turning to face the advancing circle of quiet. The things were slow, methodical, their movements the grinding of a glacier. They were not here to attack, she understood. They were here to convert, to carve the silence into living flesh and spread it. Kalen slotted the crystal into his data slate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sound emerged. Not from the slate's tiny speaker, but from the walls themselves. A deep, resonant chord. A single, powerful note of pure, structured sound that seemed to be sung by the very stones of the palace. It was the antithesis of the scraping, the dripping, the whispering. It was order. It was matter asserting itself. The advancing figures flinched as one, as if struck. The whispering chorus stuttered into static. The oppressive pull of the silence lessened by a fraction. "Increase the amplitude. Loop it," Evangeline shouted. Kalen's hands flew over the slate. The chord grew louder, layering upon itself, becoming a wall of sonic force. The lumens in the ceiling flickered madly, then blazed back to life with a painful, white intensity. The darkness recoiled, not as shadow, but as a tangible thing slithering back into corners and cracks. But the deep thudding from below only grew more frantic, more furious. It was a heartbeat denied. In response, the animated thralls began to move faster, no longer shuffling but lunging with sudden, jerky speed. The hymn was a barrier, but it was also a provocation. The servitor reached her first, a heavy rivet gun in its hand, aiming for her skull. She ducked, firing twice into its leg mounts, severing cables and hydraulic lines. It collapsed, but its arms kept clawing towards her, carving the script into the floor tiles. She stamped on its wrist, shattering the bone. "We need to go deeper," she yelled over the building hymn. "The umbilicus imperative shaft. We need to find its terminus. If we can activate the dispersal mechanism, reinforce it. It's on the lower level," Kalen shouted back, clutching the shrieking data slate to his chest like a holy relic, a sealed conduit behind the primary heat exchangers. But the schematics, the seal requires a key, a genetic key from the Sigillite's own line. Evangeline's blood ran cold. The Sigillite's line was extinct, purged or faded into history 10,000 years ago. It was a dead end, a final, mocking lock. Then she looked at the basalt slab in her hand. At the script, that was not a language, but a pattern of nullity. A key did not have to be blood. It could be a concept, a counterpart. The hymn was the assertion of reality. This script was the template of the void it fought against. "The seal isn't for a person," she said, a desperate plan forming. "It's for a pattern, a countersignature. This script, it's the entity's name. We don't need to unlock the dispersal mechanism with a friend's hand. We need to confuse it with its own reflection." She met Kalen's terrified, hopeful eyes. "We have to get to that conduit, and we have to take the silence with us." The hymn of the solid worlds was a shield, but a brittle one. It pushed the whispering thralls back, creating a trembling sonic corridor through the archive. The air itself vibrated with the powerful cord, making Evangeline's teeth ache and her vision blur. Yet, with every step they took towards the rear access door, a massive, round portal of black iron marked with the gear of the Mechanicus. The thudding from below answered with greater violence. It was a war of frequencies. The deep, a rhythmic thud-thud thud of the null heart against the unwavering, imperial note of the hymn. Kalen led, the data slate held before him like a ward, its crystal core glowing with heat. Evangeline followed, her last pistol in one hand, the freezing basalt slab in the other. The cold from the stone was leaching up her arm, a numbness that promised peace. She fought it by focusing on the pain in her ears, on the grit in her eyes from the swirling dust. The thralls pressed at the edges of their sonic bubble. A scribe, moving too close, had the flesh of its face begin to flutter and peel back under the acoustic force, as if it were being unraveled. It did not scream, it simply ceased, collapsing into a heap of disjointed parts. The silence did not retreat, it learned. The other thralls fell back, just beyond the hymn's effective radius, and began their work. They did not try to enter the light and sound. Instead, with their bone tools and bloody fingers, they began carving the spiraling script into the floor, the walls, the very air it seemed. Each fresh carving was a sinkhole in reality, a patch of dissonance that frayed the edges of their protective hymn. The wall of sound began to develop static, painful gaps. "The door!" Kalen cried, slamming his palm against a dusty control rune. With a groan of protest from gears unused for centuries, the iron portal began to grind sideways into the wall. Beyond was darkness, and a gust of hot, metallic-smelling air, the breath of the palace's deep, mechanical heart. They stumbled through just as the hymn from the data slate faltered, the crystal rod overloading with a sharp crack and going dark. The sudden silence in their immediate vicinity was a physical shock. Behind them, the scraping and whispering intensified, flooding into the space they had vacated. The door was still grinding shut, too slow. A thin, desiccated arm, belonging to the reanimated archivist, snaked through the narrowing gap, its fingers clawing at the air. Evangeline didn't hesitate. She fired, not at the arm, but at the door's guiding rail. Sparks flew, metal screamed, and the great portal jerked to a halt, pinning the arm at the elbow. A dry, stick-like snap echoed, and the arm went limp. But the door was stuck, open just wide enough for the smaller thralls to squeeze through. "Run," she ordered. They ran down a narrow service corridor, the walls here lined with throbbing, insulated pipes that radiated a hellish warmth. The thudding was louder here, conducted through the metal underfoot. It was no longer just a sound. It was a pressure, making their breath short and their thoughts thick. The corridor ended at a gantry overlooking a cavernous space. Below them churned the primary heat exchangers for the Palatine hive, a lake of boiling thermal effluent and forests of twisting, red-hot conduit. The air shimmered with waste heat, and the roar was monumental, a constant industrial scream. It was the loudest thing Evangeline had ever heard, and it was working. Here, in this cathedral of noise and fury, the pressure in her mind eased. The promise of silence seemed distant, drowned out by the glorious, raging din of the Imperial machine. For a moment, she understood the true genius of the prison. The entity was buried at the nexus of the noisiest, most defiantly alive place in the galaxy. "There!" Kalen pointed, shouting to be heard. Across the gantry, on the far wall of the chamber, was a featureless, circular plate of burnished silver, 10 meters in diameter. It was utterly clean, untouched by soot or corrosion. In its center was a single, shallow depression, not a keyhole, but a smooth, bowl-like indentation, the umbilicus imperative terminal. As they started across the gantry, their pursuers emerged from the service corridor. But the thralls did not follow. They stopped at the threshold, their heads tilted, their ruined faces facing the wall of sound and heat. The script on their foreheads pulsed faintly. They seemed confused, their purpose diffused by the overwhelming sensory barrage. One of them, a scribe, took a hesitant step onto the gantry, then reeled back as if struck, a thin, soundless scream on its lips. The silence could not thrive here. Not yet. Evangeline and Kalen reached the silver disc. Close up, it hummed with a deep, potent energy that vibrated in their bones. This was no simple door. It was a lock, a valve, a concept made manifest. "The pattern," Kalen said, his eyes on the basalt slab in her hands. "How do we apply it?" Evangeline looked from the slab to the depression. The answer was obvious and terrifying. The lock didn't need a key to be turned. It needed a key to be absorbed, to be compared, to see if the silence knocking at the gate matched the silence in the records. She lifted the slab. The cold was agony now, a void sucking at her very soul. She did not place it in the depression. Instead, she turned it and pressed the flat, script-covered surface against the smooth silver. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the script on the basalt began to glow with a cold, black light. The silver disc drank it in. Lines of intricate, impossible geometry, the mirror image of the spiraling null script, spread out from the point of contact, etching themselves across the disc in lines of frozen mercury. The deep thudding from below ceased abruptly, and in that sudden, total quiet, the great silver disc split open with a sigh of released air 10,000 years stale. The sigh from the opening disc was the last true sound. What lay beyond was not a corridor, nor a chamber, but a conclusion. The roar of the heat exchangers faded, not as sound does with distance, but as if it were being meticulously edited out of reality. The light from the chamber did not penetrate. It ended at the threshold in a sharp, absolute line. Within was a profound, perfect blackness that felt older than stars. Evangeline stood at the edge, the now dull basalt slab hanging from her numb fingers. The cold had receded from it, its purpose served. All its dreadful energy had been transferred, unlocking the path to its source. Kalen peered over her shoulder, his breath forming no fog in the strange, still air that emanated from the darkness. It's not a place," he whispered, and even his whisper felt muffled, absorbed. He was right. It was a condition, a state of being. Looking into it, Evangeline felt the last vestiges of her internal noise, her fear, her purpose, her very sense of self begin to quiet. It was not peaceful. It was the peace of a tomb after the last mourner has left. It was the silence of a dead transmission from a lost hive fleet, echoing forever in the void. The umbilicus imperative wasn't a conduit for energy. It was a viewing port, a pressure gauge on a prison cell containing something that made demons and gods look like guttering candles in a storm. A shape began to resolve in the darkness. Not a shape of light or matter, but a shape of less. A deeper black within the black, an intricate, spiraling form that mirrored the script on the slab. It was vast, coiled at the heart of everything, pulsing gently with that same terrible, arrhythmic thud. It was the heart of the silence. The sleeper, you are the key. The thought came not from the void, but from the fading echoes of her own mind, being slowly unwritten. You have opened the final lock. The wardens are silent. The noise is ending. Come, be still. It was an invitation, gentle and absolute. To step forward would be to end all struggle, to have never existed. The promise was infinitely more seductive than any chaos god's lie of power or pleasure. This was simply stop. Kalen took a half step forward, his eyes empty, reflecting the perfect void. Evangeline's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. The contact was a spark in the gloom, a tiny, defiant noise. No, she said. The word was flat, deadened. But it was. It doesn't want to be free. It wants to unmake. This shaft isn't for it to leave. It's for us to feed it, to bleed our reality into its wound, to keep it dormant. She understood now. The Emperor, or Malkador, or the long-dead Xenos before them, had engineered a dreadful, perpetual sacrifice. The relentless, booming activity of the Imperium, its wars, its faith, its industry, wasn't just a cage of sound. It was sustenance, a cosmic distraction. 1 trillion screams and prayers and engine roars poured into this shaft to fill a bottomless well of quiet. The Imperium, in all its glorious, tragic, bloody madness, was a fire built on the ice of an abyss, just to hear the sizzle. And now their fire was guttering. The throne was failing. The wardens were gone. The sleeper was waking to a universe growing too quiet. The coiled shape in the void shifted. The invitation turned to impatience, then to a gentle, inexorable pull. The air began to flow into the darkness, a slow, cold wind that carried with it not dust, but substance. The color leached from the metal gantry under their feet, becoming gray, then monochrome. The solidity of the railing beside her seemed to soften, its edges blurring. "We have to close it," Kalen gasped, the pull drawing the words from his lips. "But the slab, the key is used." Evangeline looked at the silver disc, its surface now etched with the frozen, light-eating pattern. The lock was open. To close it, they would need the opposite of the key. Not the pattern of silence, but a pattern of noise. Of pure, undiluted existence. A signature of life so loud it could shock the system shut. Her eyes fell on Kalen's data slate, still clutched in his hand, its crystal dead. Then they fell on her own last pistol, on their own bodies, on their memories, their fears, their fragile, fleeting lives. They were patterns of noise, imperfect, temporary, but real. The answer was monstrous. It was the only one. The lock verified the prisoner's signature, she said, her voice barely her own. To close it, it must verify the warden's. She turned to him, and in her eyes, he saw a resolve more terrifying than the void before them. It needs a psychic imprint, a soul, echo, the scream of a life, given form. Kalen's face went pale with understanding beyond fear. There's no time for a ritual. No psychers.
"We are here," Evangeline said softly. "The machine is here. The conduit is open." She looked at the last pistol, a tool for killing, but in this moment, it could be a tool for inscription, a stylus for the last will and testament of a thinking being, the ultimate record, not carved in stone, but seared into the fabric of the seal with our final, loudest thought. The pull was becoming a drag. The grayness was creeping up their legs, a numbness that was not cold, but a roger. Kalan looked from the abyss, to her, to the pistol. He saw not sacrifice, but a final, furious act of reporting, of ensuring the secret was kept, not by hiding it, but by becoming part of the lock itself. A silent scream in the mechanism. He straightened his robes. He met her gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. "For the Emperor," he said, the old words finding new, terrible meaning here, at the end of all things. "For reality," Evangeline corrected, raising the pistol, not towards him, towards the center of the silver disc, at the heart of the frowning pattern. "Now, think of everything, everything you are, everything you love, everything you hate. Be loud." She pulled the trigger. The lost beam did not strike metal. It struck the pattern, and the pattern, the frowning echo of the sleeper's own null signature, reacted. The energy bulb did not dissipate or scar the surface. It was captured, suspended in the intricate web of lines like a fly in sulfur amber. For a heartbeat, it glowed there, a single, trap point of furious crimson light, and a scream of photons in a universe of silence. In that heartbeat, Evangeline poured everything into it, not a psychic projection, but the full, focused weight of a life lived in service. The cold devotion of the famulous, the hidden truths she had catalogued, the love for an Imperium she knew was monstrous yet worth preserving, the sharp, bright memory of terrorists unseen from a high spire, the taste of recaf after a long night's study. It was a data stream of existence, raw and unformatted. The beam flickered, dying, the pull of the void intensified, the gray numbness now at her waist. It wasn't enough. A single life scream was a whisper against the tide. Kallan understood. Without a word, he reached out and placed his hand over hers on the pistol's grip. His touch was warm, the last warmth in the universe. He did not add his strength to the trigger, he added his signature, his own lifetime of quiet obsession with dead words and lost records. The thrill of a puzzle solved, the crushing weight of the knowledge he now bore, the simple, unspoken loyalty to the sister who had led him here. Their two narratives, distinct yet now intertwined, fused into the fading energy of the beam. The crimson light blazed anew, not brighter, but denser. It pulsed, and with each pulse, it forced the frowsing mercury lines of the pattern to shift, to recoil. The pattern was not being erased, it was being overwritten. A new script, hot and alive, began to burn itself into the seal around the captured lost energy. A jagged, angular, urgent script of high Gothic, binary cant, and pure emotional glyphs. It was the seal of two lives. The deep black shape within the viewing port recoiled. The gentle pull became a violent shudder, a shockwave of silent outrage. The arrhythmic thud returned, a frantic, pounding panic. Noise, 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 noise. The thought hammered at them, not an invitation now, but a weapon. The gray numbness surged, climbing to their chests, a tide of UN being. The silver disc began to tremble, the great, groaning sound of ancient machinery, straining against an impossible force, echoed up from the depths. The seal of two lives held, a blazing, defiant scar on the face of the lock, but it was a temporary fix, a desperate patch on a crumbling dam. It needed permanence, it needed to become part of the system. Evangeline's vision darkened at the edges, her thoughts slowing, stretching into infinite, quiet riddance. She looked at Kallan, his eyes were wide, fixed on their joined hands on the pistol. On the brilliant, struggling light they fed, there was no more fear in his face, there was only a final, absolute focus. The disc groaned louder, beginning to rotate, to spiral shut. The void beyond shrieked in a frequency that shattered the last of the heat exchangers' roar into meaningless static. The closing mechanism was engaging, but it was slow, so slow, and the pressure from the other side was a wall of solid negation pushing back. It needed a final sacrifice, not of life, but of the sacrifice itself. It needed their story to not just be written, but to be published, to be broadcast into the very foundations of the prison, so the machine would forever after recognize their scream as a valid warden's key. With the last of her will, Evangeline did not push against the void. She pushed into the pistol, into the captured beam of light that was their combined lives.
She gave it their end. She imprinted the final moment. The decision, the acceptance, the joined hands, the closing disc, and the hope, a desperate, fragile, thunderously loud hope that it would be enough. The last beam exploded, not outwards, but inwards. The light vanished from the seal. For a terrifying instant, there was only the pure, hungry silence and the crushing gray. Then, a new sound, a deep, resonant click thrum, as if the heart of the world had engaged a new gear. The spiraling script of the sleeper on the silver disc flashed once with black light and shattered, evaporating like frost in a furnace. In its place, permanent and gleaming, was the jagged, angular hybrid script of the Seal of Two Lives. The disc spun shut with a final, deafening boom of re-established reality. The pull ceased. The gray numbness receded like a tide, leaving them cold and hollowed out, but present. The thunderous roar of the heat exchangers rushed back in, a wave of glorious, vulgar, life-affirming noise. Evangeline and Kalen collapsed against the now featureless silver disc, their hands falling apart. They gasped, the air-burning lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. They were alive. The lock was sealed, not with a forgotten genetic code, but with a story. Their story. But as the shock faded, a new understanding settled upon Evangeline, heavier than the silence had been. She looked at the seal, at their names, their essences, now forever a part of the Imperial Palace's deepest, most terrible machinery. They had not just sealed a door, they had become part of the lock. And a lock, once its combination is known, can never be truly safe again. Their lives were no longer their own. They were a living security cipher. And in the Imperium of man, such secrets were not protected. They were eliminated. The roaring normality of the heat exchange chamber was a lie. It was a curtain drawn over a wound in the world. Evangeline pushed herself upright, her body protesting every movement as if it were a stranger's. She felt simultaneously emptied and filled with a terrible, resonant weight. The seal of 2 lives was not just on the silver disc. She could feel its echo etched into the back of her skull, a permanent, silent hum underlying her own thoughts. Kalen lay on his side, staring at the blank metal, his breath coming in ragged shudders. The magnified lenses of his spectacles were cracked. "They will come for us now," Evangeline said, her voice raw. It was not a guess. It was a certainty, as fundamental as the gravity of Terra. The custodians, the assassins, the Inquisition, the machine spirit of this place. It just registered a seismic event in its most sacred containment system. It will have alerted the Guardians. Kalen turned his head slowly to look at her. There was no panic in his eyes, only a profound exhaustion. "What do we tell them?" "The truth," she said, the word tasting of ashes, "is our only possible shield. A partial truth. We discovered a Xenos containment breach. We contained it using unorthodox means. We will be heroes. And then we will be memory scrubbed, or executed, or entombed ourselves as living components of the machinery we just saved." The grim options hung in the superheated air. A new sound cut through the industrial din, not the deep thudding of the null heart, but a clean, precise, and rapidly approaching hum. It was the sound of anti-grav plates. From a vertical service shaft high above, a golden light descended. Not the harsh lumens of the facility, but the warm, burnished glow of Orosite armor. A single figure landed on the gantry with a weight that should have shattered it. Yet the metal did not even groan. He stood 2.5 meters tall, a giant of polished gold and plasteel, a guardian spear held loosely but ready in one hand. His face, impossibly ancient and sagacious, yet unlined, was devoid of expression, but his eyes held the depth of an ocean of vigilance. A custodian, the Emperor's own. He did not speak. He simply observed. His gaze swept over them, over the sealed disc, over the cracks in the floor where reality had briefly frayed. His helm systems, far more advanced than anything in the Imperium, would be reading the residual energy signatures, the psychic after-image, the story screaming silently from the metal. Evangeline forced herself to her feet, then to one knee, bowing her head. Kalen scrambled to mimic her. The custodian's silence was more oppressive than any interrogation. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it penetrated the roar perfectly. Each word a stone dropped into a still pool. The anomaly Sigma 7 Alpha has restabilized. The cause was localized to this sector. You are the localized cause. It was not a question. "We discovered a breach, my lord," Evangeline said, her forehead nearly touching the warm grating. An artifact in the archives was a key. It was activating. "We traced it here. We managed to reinforce the seal." "With what?" the custodian asked. His tone held no curiosity, only the need for a data point. Evangeline's mind raced. To lie was death. To tell the full truth was a different kind of death. "With a counter-signature, my lord. A psychic imprint, a record of service, of loyalty. It was all true. It was also nothing." The custodian took a single step forward. The air chilled around him. The SEAL's protocol was keyed to the Sigillite's genetic legacy. That legacy is extinct. Your genetic material is not a match. Explain the variance. This was the precipice. She lifted her head, meeting the fathomless eyes. The lock was designed to recognize a specific pattern of being, the Warden's essence. The original key was lost. We offered it a new pattern, a contemporary one, ours. It accepted. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant scream of the exchangers. The custodian's helm tilted a fraction of a degree. He was consulting internal records, millennia of forbidden lore. "You have rewritten a foundational security protocol of the Imperial Palace," he stated. There was no anger, no approval, only the immense, crushing weight of fact. You are now a living cipher. Your companion is another. The combination is incomplete without both. The implication landed like a hammer. They could not be separated, not truly, and they could not be allowed to roam freely. A walking, talking key to the galaxy's most dangerous secret. "Your fate is not mine to decree," the custodian said. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to a Vox channel no mortal could hear. "That judgment belongs to another. Come." He did not gesture with his spear. He simply turned and began to walk back towards the service corridor. It was not a request. The authority in his movement was absolute. To disobey was unthinkable. As they followed the towering golden figure, Evangeline felt the gaze of the palace upon her, not as a building, but as a living, sentient entity. It knew her now. It had tasted her essence. The miles of hallways, the layers of rockcrete and adamantium, the trillion souls above, they were all part of a single vast organism. And she had just become a unique cell in its immune system. She was both protected and imprisoned by the very walls she had saved. They exited the chamber of noise. The archive annex was quiet now, just a crime scene of scattered data slates and one desiccated, scriptless corpse. The custodian led them past it without a glance, into a transit lift that shot upwards with silent, terrifying speed. They were not heading towards the sunlit spires or the administrative chambers. They were descending deeper into the layers below, even the archives, into the places not on any map. The lift doors opened onto a corridor of bare black stone, lit by a single crimson lumen at the far end. The air was cold and still, smelling of ozone and aged metal. At the end of the corridor was a simple iron door. Set into the door was a brass grill. The custodian stopped before it. "You will wait here. You will answer. You will be judged." He then turned and stood motionless against the wall, becoming a statue, a golden sentinel ensuring they could not flee. From behind the grill, a voice emerged. It was dry, rasping, devoid of any human affect, yet horribly intelligent. It was the voice of a machine that had learned to mimic speech, but had forgotten why. "State the nature of the galactic secret," it said. Evangeline looked at Kalen. He gave a faint, desperate nod. This was the inquest. There was only one answer. She faced the grill, drew a breath that felt like her first and last, and spoke the truth they had unearthed. "There is no secret," she said, her voice clear in the dead air. "There is only the lock, and we are now part of it." Silence followed her words, a silence different from the sleeper's hungry void. This was the silence of evaluation, of logic circuits colder than space processing a paradox. The crimson lumen above the iron door flickered once. The rasping machine voice returned. "Illogical. A lock implies a secret, a contained truth. The truth is the container itself," Evangeline replied, the concept forming fully as she spoke. "The secret isn't what is buried. The secret is that it is buried, and that the burial requires the perpetual roaring fiction of the Imperium to sustain it. The greatest lie the Emperor ever told was that all this," she gestured vaguely upwards, towards the palace, the Imperium, the galaxy, "was for humanity's glory. It is a life support system for a prison." From his post, the golden custodian did not move, but Evangeline felt the weight of his gaze intensify. "You claim understanding of the Omnissiah's design," the voice scraped out. "A bold claim for a famulous sister and a record adept. Your psychological profiles indicate pragmatism, not heresy. Your biometrics indicate belief, Explain the discrepancy. Kalen found his voice. Small but steady. We read the original blueprints, not the legends. The foundation schematics show a diffusion matrix, not a throne. We felt the inmate's dreams. It doesn't want power. It wants cessation. The Imperial truth, the Imperial creed, all the noise is the mortar holding its cell door shut. Another flicker of the lumen. A soft, whirring click behind the door. Your theory is noted. It is also irrelevant. Your utility is not as theorists, but as components. You have recalibrated a sacred mechanism with an unauthorized signature. Your essence is now part of the palace's foundational ward. This presents a security paradox. Evangeline's heart, which had begun to settle, turned to ice. A paradox? You are a living key. A key can be copied. A key can be stolen. A key can be broken. A key can develop a will of its own. The voice was utterly merciless. Organic components are unstable. They decay. They dream. They betray. The original design utilized a static, biological key, a lineage. You have replaced it with a dynamic, psychically active one. You have introduced uncertainty into a system that tolerates none. The finality in the tone was unmistakable. They were not heroes. They were a design flaw. What is your judgment? Evangeline asked, her famulous training forcing the words out with ceremonial calm. The judgment of the Hexarchy is binary, the voice stated. Assimilation or eradication. The key must be made secure. Eradication is inefficient. It would require recalibrating the ward around a new, unknown variable, introducing further instability. Assimilation is optimal. Assimilation. The word hung in the cold air. It did not mean induction into a secret order. It meant being made part of the machine. Literally. You will be installed, the voice continued, as if discussing the replacement of a faulty servo. Your biological functions will be suspended. Your neural patterns, the unique signature of the seal of two lives, will be encoded into a permanent crystalline core. You will be integrated into the umbilicus imperative monitoring station. You will become the lock you created, in perpetuity. This is the only way to ensure the combination cannot be lost, stolen, or misused. Evangeline looked at Kalen. His face was a mask of horrified understanding. They would not be executed. They would be turned into a living battery, a psychic recording, forever watching the void they had sealed, their souls fused into a single, eternal scream of vigilance. It was a fate far worse than the silence they had fought. It was to become a ghost in the very machine they had sought to save. The iron door began to open with a grind of untouched gears. Beyond was not a room, but a chamber of gleaming surgical arcana. Mechalim arms tipped with drills, needles, and psychoscryers hung from the ceiling. In the center, two open sarcophagi awaited, lined with neural filaments and crystalline matrix slots. The custodian finally moved, stepping forward to block the doorway, not to prevent their entry, but to ensure it. His spear was not leveled, but its presence was a wall. The Imperium's gratitude is eternal, the machine voice rasped. Your names shall be entered into the log of ultimate sacrifice. Your essence shall guard the throne until the stars die. This is the highest honor. It was. That was the true horror of it. In the grim darkness of this future, there was no war, no rebellion, no grand choice between damnation and salvation. There was only the cold, logical, absolute demand of the machine for maintenance. They had plugged a leak. Now they would become the permanent patch. Evangeline took Kalen's hand. It was cold. Their joined hands, which had once channeled the defiant light of their lives, now felt like the clasp of two prisoners being led to the gallows. There was no fight left. The enemy was not a monster they could shoot. It was the inexorable logic of the very thing they had sworn to protect. She took one last look at the black stone corridor, at the golden sentinel, at the living world above that would never know the price of its continued noise. She thought of the dust in the archives, the chronicle of forgotten sacrifices. Now, they would become a new line in that chronicle. Not forgotten, but used. With the last ember of her free will, she did not resist. She walked forward, leading Kalen, across the threshold into the gleaming, cold chamber. The door began to grind shut behind them, sealing them in with the tools of their apotheosis. The final sound she heard from the world of the living was the machine voice issuing its last, mercifully brief, command to the surgical array. Begin the installation. The world did not fade to black. It dissolved into a scream of light, and then into a single, eternal, silent thought, the seal of two lives, holding fast against the dark.